It appears that we are right now at 10 o'clock, so I thank all of you for joining us for the first session of track 4.2 this morning. It should be a very interesting session this morning, I think. It seems that we are going to be treated to three different views of architecting as a theme in our society, and I think a theme that this morning's keynote and some of the secondary comments have suggested are going to be an increasingly important and better recognized theme within the code theme. So it is my great pleasure to introduce the first speaker this morning. He's going to introduce us to the role of the process architect in augmenting the traditional triad of systems engineering, systems architecting, and project management. Many of you probably will already know Joe. Joe Kasser, in addition to having 30 years of experience, is a very frequent contributor to the coaching community, and he may also be known to some of you in his role as our Region 6 Memory Board representative. So please join me in welcoming Joe Kasser.
Thank you very much for choosing to attend this session. I'm going to talk about a problem that we faced in teaching down in the University of South Australia. We provide degrees and courses in systems engineering, but it's very difficult to teach what systems engineering is because not too many people know. And I say not too many people know because if you get two systems engineers in a room discussing what systems engineering is, you generally end up with 3 or 4 descriptions. So what I'm going to talk about are overlapping job functions, definitions, and I'm going to look at the views from an alternative perspective, discuss the 3 roles, introduce a new roles, separate roles and functions. So you've all seen something like this, where you get systems engineering, project management, and systems architecting. Everybody says they overlap. I'm used to heckling from the front. No? So these roles overlap, and everybody sort of accepts it. But I'm trying to understand why they overlap. And what I'd like to do is talk about why I think they overlap. And once we understand why they overlap, maybe we can move forward and take away the overlap. So let's take a look at the definitions first of all and see if they provide any help. Systems architecting was defined 5 years ago, and it's the art and science of creating and building complex systems. It's the part of the systems development most concerned with scoping, structuring, and certification. So I like to think of that as the front end of the process. Here's the Nkosi definition of systems engineering, and you've probably all seen it, heard it, so I won't read it again, and if you haven't, you can read while I'm talking. Good exercise in multitasking there. What this does is it sort of takes the product of the system architect and begins to implement the system. So that's where in that diagram you saw system architecting was out front, systems engineering was next to it, and there was a small area of overlap. Then we get into project management. Planning, organizing, directing, controlling, accomplish a set of goals, and there's a lot of overlap, as you saw in the diagram. So now let's start looking at some of the semantics involved. We talk about systems engineering, systems architecting, and project management. We also talk about systems engineers, systems architects, and project management, and project managers. And sometimes we use the words interchangeably, and sometimes we use them differently. So, for the purpose of this discussion, we're going to use them in different. So, systems engineering is not the same as systems engineers. Systems engineering is a function. Systems engineer is a role. And a role is the title or job description of a person in an organization, and the functions are the activities performed by that role in the organization. Everybody with me so far? Now let's map these onto the playing field. And the playing field, well, before we get there, some of the functions performed in a role in one organization might be performed by a different role in another organization. What I mean there is the role of the systems engineer may do some systems architecting, systems engineering, and project management functions. And in a different organization, they would do a different set of those functions. So we come to the playing field. Let's map it on the playing field as the product and the process over time. So we're concerned about the product that's the system being produced. We're concerned with the process of producing the system. And what I'd like to do is separate that out into 4 quadrants based on planning and implementing. So when we start mapping the activities or the functions into those 4 quadrants, in general, because there is some overlap, I place systems engineering in the quadrant that deals with implementing the product. And project management in the quadrant that deals with implementing the process. Product planning, I map systems architecting into. But then I find that I've got a gap. There is no known activity that has a name for what goes on in planning the process. It's not that those activities are not done. Those activities are done. It's just we haven't called them out by name specifically. And sometimes, because there's no role for that, the functions are not done, and then we're in trouble. So what I propose is a new role: to institutionalize and organize the project planning functions, remove some of the overlaps between the 3 current organizational roles, resolve some of the difficulties in teaching the roles and functions. Because I can now say, oh yeah, that belongs to process architecting. That's not, even though systems engineers do it, the activity is process architecting. And this allows us to clarify the bodies of knowledge for each of the 4 roles. And the skills needed, we clarify the body of knowledge for each of the 4 functions, and then determine the skill needed for the roles, if the roles are going to overlap one of the other functions. So the 4 functions: systems engineering, responsible for the technical implementation of the design; systems architecting, responsible for the architecture of the system that will be produced; project management, responsible for managing the implementation of the process; and process architecting, responsible for the process that will produce the system. So we now have a role in which we have defined who is responsible for the process that will produce the system. The conceptual difference between project management and process architecting. Process management manages the implementation of the specific goals and objectives of the project described by the work breakdown structure and the Gantt and the PERT charts. When you give a project manager a schedule, set of resources, they can go ahead and manage that project. Process architecting, is the function that creates that WBS, the Gantt charts, and the schedule in the first place. And I came to this conclusion. I was given a task to develop a course on project development. And it was very difficult to separate out project development from project management. And so project development is planning the project. And you need to figure out which process to use, what resources and schedules, and that is what I call process architecting or project development. I use the term process architect so I could have a nice quadrant with systems architecting and process architecting. So there's the role rectangle. And now, if we go back, remember that drawing with the three ovals that overlapped? Well, you can take a systems engineering role in one organization, and the systems engineer does those activities. In another organization, they get the boots, and it looks like that. In the third organization, it looks like that. So when you get all the systems engineers together and they talk about what they're doing as systems engineers, that's why you get the confusion, because the roles and the functions are being confused. Because the systems engineering role may perform functions in the other quadrant, this gives us confusion about what a systems engineer is. And the role of other quadrants may be performed by the systems engineer. And sometimes you find systems engineering done in organizations, but it's called something else. So that's where those confusion and disagreements over there comes from. It's the fact that systems engineers do more than systems engineering. The functions performed by the process architecting role are not new. They're being or should be performed in organization. And Sarah Shear discusses many of those roles in her paper in 2003. And this afternoon we will be doing a presentation, a case study of a requirements solicitation and elucidation project that we did in 1989, in which we did process architecting. And it was only the fact that we did process architecting that allowed that case study project to succeed. So what are the functions of a process architect? Well, for a start, it's the choice of the life cycle, the choice of the methodology, the process for implementing the methodology. What process products are produced at the milestones? What checkpoints do we use within the process? And these have to be scaled to the size of the project. If you're only doing a 6-month project, there's no reason to use an entire Prince 2 process with all the process products that's needed. Are you going to have a separate requirements document, or are you going to combine the concept of operations and the requirements documents into one? It's not the documents that are important, it's the information they contain. And depending on the size of the project, you need to know how much process products you need. And this is the job of the process architect. Which life cycle to use? Spiral? Which of the spirals? Should they use the waterfall? The waterfall works under some conditions, but not all. What about the build-buy decisions? That I put in the domain of the process architect, because that affects the process. Process improvement. That's a process architecting function, because that's tracking the process and tweaking it in the same way as a system architect should track the development of a system and possibly tweak it. Change agent. Ensuring standards and capability and maturity model compliance. Keeper of the flame, of the information about processes. And that person is responsible for business process re-engineering. So in summary, I've talked about overlapping job functions, the definitions, the view from an alternative perspective, the 3 roles. I've added a new role, and I've talked about the differences between roles and functions. In conclusion, the introduction of the roles rectangle makes it easier to define the organization roles of systems engineer, systems architect, and project manager, and the functions of systems engineering, systems architecting, and project management as employed in the development of systems by adding the fourth role of process architect and identifying the functions of process architecting. The function of systems engineering in the development of systems is more clearly and tightly scoped because the function of systems engineering is in that one rectangle. Irrespective of what systems engineers actually do, the functions of systems engineering is in that rectangle, and that allows us to set the boundary for the body of knowledge of systems engineering. We do not now have to try and build in the whole project management body of knowledge into the systems engineering body of knowledge. And this can be used as a basis for a certification program for systems engineers that's relatively simple because we now have a firm boundary, and that helps us teach. Any questions or comments?